Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, worship team. It was wonderful this morning. Well, it's good to see you. As you can see, I'm not Darren. He called yesterday, and it turns out just have his whole family in prayers that he tested positive for COVID yesterday. And we have other family members as well. So just lift everyone up in prayers as everyone is in recovery, and keep healthy yourself. Just pray that everyone kind of just gets through this time, because tis the season right now. So take care of yourselves. So I wanted to start this morning with the message with a story about when I was in 8th grade. So when I was about 13 years old, when I was in 8th grade, I didn't have a whole lot of thoughts that didn't revolve around three things. That was me, myself, and I. I usually spent my Saturdays playing video games or doing whatever I could to not think about school the week coming. One Saturday morning, however, I remember very clearly. And it's funny how it works. You don't remember the Saturdays that you played games all day, but this one I do remember. My mom came downstairs to the basement, which was my very first man cave at the time, and she rarely came down. And I always knew that it meant trouble for one reason or another when I heard those footsteps coming down the carpeted stairs. But when she got to this particular day, she said, "David, would you like to go bring some cookies over to the nursing home today?" I didn't say anything, but I thought to myself, "Sure, Mom, that's what every teenage boy would love to do with their Saturday." What I didn't realize, though, was that my mom was asking me merely out of politeness. Saying no was not going to be an option. So my mom spent the rest of the morning baking while I grumbled to myself. Then we spent time putting together small assortments of cookies in sandwich bags, and we tied them with little ribbon. After we all put them in a box, we headed out to the local nursing home to give them away. I spent half the car ride scowling at my mom through the rearview mirror, and the other half moping about my circumstances. I wondered how many of my classmates had moms that made them do such ridiculous things. And when we got to the nursing home, my mom carried the box of cookies and gave me the task of handing them out one by one. I was always shy, particularly around people I didn't know, so doing this was definitely outside my comfort zone. I would cautiously approach each person, whether they were on a walker, in a wheelchair, or just walking around. I gave cookies to everyone I saw, and I took note. Their faces most. Some of them smiled softly, others gave me a hug, and every one of them were really grateful for this small gesture. And I have to admit, even my stone-cold teenage heart, after a while, my attitude started to change. This wasn't so bad. In fact, it felt good to do something for others, even though I didn't know them. My reluctance to be there began to melt away, and before long, I found myself smiling too, even, which was a rare feat at that age. That was at least until I began to hear the awful wailing coming from a distant room. The wails became screams, and I remember having a knot in my stomach that would slowly build because of it. Where was this wail coming from? What was wrong? Why was someone screaming? I continued to pass out the cookies with a smile, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the discomforting feeling that came from each loud scream. It was constant. It kept going on and on. Wasn't somebody going to do anything about it? I didn't see nurses or caretakers rush anywhere to make it go away. I guess it was the norm. But it kept getting louder and louder. And as I went from room to room, I knew it was coming closer. And then finally, it was my next stop. I really did not want to go in that room, but my mom seemed to insist. I remember peeking around the open doorway, and I saw something that I would never forget. I saw a woman standing near the foot of her bed, staring at the ceiling and just yelling at it. Tears were streamed down her wrinkled face, which was twisted in anger and agony. Her yelling was incomprehensible, even at close. I had no idea what she was saying. If she was saying words, I couldn't understand them. And I'm not sure even at 12 or 13 that I fully comprehended what I was seeing in that moment. But I determined later that what I think she was doing was crying out to God to end everything, to take her away. It was clear that whatever the extent of her pain and suffering was, she had had enough. She was done. All hope was gone, and she was ready to move on. Did I mention that I didn't want to go? I really didn't want to disturb this moment, but I crept closely. I had a plan. If I could, since she was occupied, if I could just sneak in there, put the cookies on her nightstand, and get out of there, that was what I would do. But to my horror, I wasn't so lucky. Before I got a few steps away from the nightstand, she noticed. She turned and she looked at me with wild blue eyes. I froze mid-stride, and I just looked at her blankly. Eventually, we just stared at each other. But her eyes eventually went from my face to my hand and what was in there. So I stretched out my hand, I offered the bag of cookies to her, and she grabbed them. She looked down at them for a moment, curious, pause, then she looked back up at me with a quivering lip. And it was that look in her eyes in that moment that will forever be burned into my memory. And I will say, for those of you who have never seen God, that's when I first saw God, in those eyes that looked back at me. So that was one memory. And today, what I wanted to talk to you was about is hope. And hope, not just the casual kind of hope like we say, I hope the Cardinals win, or if you're a Cubs fan, I hope the Cubs win. I hope to lose 10 pounds this coming 2024. I hope the store will return my kid's Christmas toy that's already broken. I'm not even talking about the New Year's obligatory, I hope you have a good 2024 and it's better than 2023, etc. Now, I'm not talking about that kind of hope. I want to dig deeper today and talk about a hope that overcomes any circumstance, like the woman in this story, the woman who lost but then found in the most unexpected way. I want to talk about a hope that is unquenchable, unkillable, uncrushable, the kind of hope when all else fails. That's the kind of hope that I think we need to hear about and learn about. So the text today, I'll be honest, before we get to it, it lays out some of the harsh truths about the world that Jesus was born into. And it's what I would typically call a gloss over text, one of those type where we just kind of read, don't put much thought into, and move on. But today I wanted to pause and spend a little bit of time to point out a few things that might be easy to miss on the first read. So our scripture is Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. If you have your Bibles, you can follow along. And the main point of this setting in this text that I want to get to you is that the world that Jesus was born into, the world was not a good place when Jesus was born. And sometimes we can forget about that when we look at like the Hallmark cards and the greeting cards, and we focus so much on the Christmas story as this happy moment, which it was, but it was sandwiched in between a lot of hard realities. So we're going to look a little bit at that. So at verse 13, it says that after the wise men were gone, after the party was over, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother, and stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child and kill him. So one of the things I like to do, just as a side note, I like to put myself in the shoes of the different characters of the Bible. So if you would with me, let's imagine that this is kind of like a Disney movie, if you will, and we're going to look at the different points of view. So Herod is our Disney villain, if you will, and imagine it from his viewpoint. So beforehand, these wise men, these magi, show up to his palace, and they start prophesying about a new king of the Jews. Imagine his point of view. What do you mean? I'm the king of the Jews. Who is this that you're talking about that's trying to replace me? You're talking about a star? Where's my star? You can almost imagine this King Herod character singing a song about where his star is. But Herod, he's no dummy. He says to the wise men, "Go and find this new king of the Jews and tell me where he is so I can, quote unquote, worship him." He comes up with an evil plan, if you will. He plots to kill Jesus before he even knows his name. Then the angel of the Lord knows what's going on. He appears to Joseph, says, "Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and Mary." So now let's put ourselves in the sandals of Mary and Joseph. Again, the party's over. Imagine hearing this news that they had to leave everything. And remember that Mary, whatever support system she had, she was now in the midst of a scandal with being pregnant outside of wedlock. Any support from the community she would have had, she already would have been an outsider. Now they had to get up and leave. It was just going to be Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. That's it. There was going to be no one to help them. And they had to leave now. Now, from Joseph's point of view, imagine what his thoughts were. He might have thought about, he had Joseph's carpentry shop in the town of Bethlehem where he worked. He was going to have Joseph and son, but now he has to close up shop, leave Egypt for an unknown amount of time. And where would they go? So verse 14, it said, "That night Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother, and they stayed there until Herod's death." We don't know how long that was, but we know that they were in immediate danger. The angel didn't give much time. Joseph and Mary, they had to leave now, that night, because just hours later, tragedy would befall Bethlehem. So imagine again, on the run. Imagine them trying to keep baby or toddler Jesus at this moment hidden from sight. Imagine praying that he holds true to the song lyric, "No crying he makes," as they try to hide from place to place, praying that they wouldn't be found. No doubt the whole situation probably seemed hopeless to Mary, but God was with them. And in verse 15b, it said that this fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, "I called my son out of Egypt." So this verse that almost seems out of place at first, it's telling us that this was all a part of the plan. The prophecy said that Jesus, the Son of God, would be called out of Egypt, and it would be very much like another hero in the Bible. Matthew, the writer of this, is connecting Jesus to one of the most important Jewish figures, Moses. So very much like Moses, Jesus had many things in common. Here's a short list of what the things they did have in common. Both Moses and Jesus, they had their life threatened from birth. They were hidden as a baby. They were brought up in a foreign land. They were brought out of Egypt. They both spent time in the wilderness, 40 days for Jesus, 40 years for Moses. And they both established God's covenant. Moses was the old covenant with the 10 Commandments, and Jesus at the Last Supper would establish a new covenant. And there were many other connections, but we need to move on to verse 16. And it said, finally, our last verse that we're looking at, it said, Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men did not come back to him, did not tell him where Jesus was. So instead, he sent soldiers to kill all the boys around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under. And this was all based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. So, Herod first tried the quiet way to eliminate Jesus. That didn't work. Now he went extreme. And Herod's atrocity is yet another connection between Moses and Jesus with the killing of the male children. Now, Herod did not live much longer after this. So, why am I telling you this? The week after Christmas, why am I giving you this text that's a little bit on the dark side, that shows the hardship? Well, I'm trying to point out that first century Israel, the world around that moment on the Hallmark Christmas card, before and after, it was not so pleasant. It was less the Hallmark greeting card, more like Game of Thrones, or more like a dark Disney movie. But both the story of Exodus, of Moses and the Israel's fleeing Egypt, and the Christmas story, while they tell times of great difficulty, this is the but, and the big but. It was also the time when God did amazing things. So I'm not focusing on the negative. The reason I emphasize the hardships of the Christmas story is not to try to depress you, but to do the opposite, to reveal a truth. And that truth is that God does his best work when things are desperate. Put it another way, God's responses are appropriate to the occasion. Little trouble, little solution. Big trouble, big solution. So when the chips are down, when it looks like evil is going to win, our heroes are going to be vanquished, and when all hope is lost, when Pharaoh's army shows up to destroy the Hebrews who are unarmed and their backs are to the Red Sea and they're trapped, when all else fails and they're about to cut to commercial because evil's going to win, that's when God shows up mightily. That's when miracles happen. That's when God keeps his promises and restores hope to his people. So it has happened time and time again in the scriptures. And guess what? It will continue to happen as long as time moves forward. So, in response, as we look forward to the new year and what 2024 will bring, and I gotta say, it's looking interesting already. But as 2024 comes, I want to give 2 pieces of homework that we can add to our New Year's resolutions. And I hope they bring you the hope that will help you get through this year and beyond. The first piece of homework is pray that God opens your eyes to see his work, because where God is, that's where hope is. The problem today is not that God is not present and that he's not doing great things. The problem is we are far too often blind to it. We're so caught up in our own mess, or in our own sin, our own distractions and busyness, we miss the truth far too often. And 13-year-old me in the story, I wasn't looking for God that day in the nursing home. That I can guarantee. God was the last thing on my mind in those days. And I can't fully speak for the woman, but I imagine that the last thing she expected was a strange boy to come in her room to offer a small gift. But the point is, even though none of us were looking for God in the right way, at least, we both found God in that moment, because that's where God shows up in the unexpected. And I have no doubt in my mind that when I saw her face, that will forever be etched in my mind, I saw the look of pain that she had. It shifted to peace and wonder. Her screaming stopped that day. It turned to quiet. And her tears of pain, they changed to tears of joy. So neither one of us at that moment were looking for God in the right way, but it happened anyway. So pray that God reveals to you where he's working, and it may come in the most unexpected place and time. Finally, the second piece of homework for 2024 is I pray that each of you become a hope spreader. And if you don't have hope, see number 1. Look for it in God first. And then once you get hope, spread hope. Do something with your words, your actions. They mean something. They mean more than you can possibly know. And hope, this world needs hope. God knows the world needs a little bit more hope in 2024. I don't know if you've noticed, but with everything going on, I don't even need to list, there's so many. But they need hope. And guess what? The church is uniquely equipped to be a hope-spreading factory. So we are the body of Christ, are we not? We are the extension of God's love and God's hope, the real hope, the all else fails kind of hope. So this, I believe, in 2024 is our church's time to shine. This very well could be one of the most important times for the church in our lifetime. So let's not miss it. I wanted to leave you with just a couple of, I like practical, so I wanted to just give some practical ideas of ways that we can be a hope spreader this coming year. One way is simple acts of kindness, smiles, encouragement, hugs, having God conversations, doing something kind for someone. I mean, look what happened when you put cookies in a bag and gave them to a nursing home. I didn't even bake those cookies. But do something. And if you've got kids, both young and old, remember they are watching and listening to you. What are your words and actions showing them in the house? Are they full of hope or are they full of anxiety? If you have older kids, teenagers, they're especially having a hard time right now. But remember that teenagers, I think one of the most important things for them is that they know that you care about them, that they know that you will spend time with them and want to spend time with them, even if they have a lot of their time in other places. Another thing we can do, mend broken relationships, family, friends, people we've written off as hopeless. And if you can do nothing else, if your relationship is that bad where you can't even communicate with them, you can still pray for them. Because God does amazing things to hearts over time for those who are prayed for. So let's be the church in 2024. Let's be a beacon of hope for our household and neighborhood and the world around us. Let's spread the kind of hope that is there when all else fails.